So good afternoon. Welcome to the loan application walkthrough webinar. I am Dominique Pryor Anderson, Senior Director of Community Investment here at TREC Community Investors. We are doing this loan application walkthrough. It's important that we meet everyone where they are, I believe, and we want to make sure that our application doesn't keep all of our mission-driven developers and community developers from borrowing our money, because if you hear me, I say often, borrow our money. And so we want to make sure that there's no barrier to you all doing business with us, and we want to be the best resource possible. With that, I will pass it over to our team to introduce themselves, and I'm just going to go to my right on the screen, and Kiwanis is to my right.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, I'm trying to navigate a few things, but just want to introduce myself and say I'm Kawana Shorten, the Community Investment Manager here at TREC Community Investors. Nice to meet you all if we've never met, and for those that I know and I see often, nice to see you again. And I'll pass it over to Clint.
Sure. And thank you, Kiwanis and Dominique. My name is Clinton Hill. Most people call me Clint. I know I've probably met a few of you. I see we've got a few people hopping on too that are fresh names and faces to me, but my background is mainly in banking in the past, as well as development of real estate. I've been here with TREC Community Investors now about 2.5 years, and I function primarily to do the underwriting for loans that enter into our funding programs. And I work with our borrowers directly, just in compilation of a lot of these packages. And one of the people, at least, that's kind of taking in a lot of the documents and things that will be talked about later on this call, and doing the general due diligence to package together for submission to our loan committee and closing of funds for these developments. So I know we'll get into some more of that process a little bit later, but just in the short bit, that's me and who I am, and I'm happy to answer any questions that pop up later on. In the meantime, I'll pass things along. Do we have anybody else that needs to introduce?
Alondra's on the call. You pass it
Got
to
you.
her. Thank
Alondra,
you.
please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Alondra Gortavaya and I'm the Community Investment Associate with TREC. I support Kiwanis and our other community investment manager with our programs and initiatives. This includes education programs, consulting services, and DCP. Nice to meet everyone, if I haven't met you all yet.
Great. And with that, we're going to jump right in. And Clint, you're going to talk through a little bit of, what makes the application. And we're going to talk through the application and website review, what makes a great project.
Screen's shuffling around on me. I am going to share my screen for those of you who have your computers open. I know some of you may be dialed in, but I'm going to share that right now. Almost there. So anyway, all I've done here is pulled up our website. And the reason I pulled that up is I know we're going to be talking a bit about the application process itself, but I want to kind of give an idea of just before we get into more detail, kind of keeping in mind certain timelines and our programs that we have available, such that we can work together to make sure that we're ready and when you need us, as Dominique said earlier, to meet you where you are and in your project during its various stages. So I'm hopping here on our website. We have a borrow tab here that we're going to use to just sort of kind of highlight the program at its height. I'm scrolling down here to point out really three, I would say, different loan types that we have available, and they're all going to be based upon the timing of where the project is in its life cycle. And so I'm talking about these, as I said, as a sort of backdrop against which to frame the application and the due diligence files and things to keep in mind. So of our three, the first really that we deal with often is a pre-development loans. So these, of course, are going to be parts of the process for the project that are early on enough that you need some help funding. So it's going to be involved with a lot of the work with other consultants, such as architects and engineers, especially as you're going through processes with the city and paying any consultants on the civil engineering front, for example, or getting through permitting. A lot of those soft costs that have to happen before you can actually break ground on a construction or even sometimes a heavier renovation, depending on what you're looking for. So a lot of traditional lenders actually won't do these types of loans. So we're proud that we can work with borrowers to provide these. And it's just something to keep in mind with timing as it's concerned, such that we're kind of engaged early enough and that we have enough pieces of the puzzle of the application that we'll be able to work together and get funds right when they're absolutely needed. And on that, I'll talk about kind of the high level requirements for these in a second, but just as I'm going through the categories, I think really our acquisition loans as the second key piece that's in many ways it's similar to pre-development insofar as it really helps to have us involved early in the process. If you're looking to acquire land and need some loans to help supplement an equity position on that, then we're happy to help there too. But as you're all aware, going through trying to make sales engagements of these different transactions, looking for properties, getting them under contract. There's a lot of uncertainty there. So the more we can have ready, sometimes even before a property's found or right when it is, such that we'll be able to do a lot of due diligence before we actually need to close on the property. So again, just keeping in mind those first two. And lastly, here, our construction lending program, as it states, it's when we're going to be involved in financing, and of course, the larger aspects of typically ground up construction, but also, as I mentioned, renovation, kind of lumping those in together. So given all the work that's already gone into all the planning stages and all the permitting, really want to be able to break ground and to get the project started exactly when you can, so that there's no delay on that. So that's where we come in, again, getting an early idea on the due diligence front. There's going to be some different types of consultants and review that we'll have during that process, just by nature of its building. So you might be engaged, of course, directly with the builder or potentially developers that you're working. Kind of depends sometimes on the type of legal entity that you are. We work both with for-profit developers as well as nonprofit developers. So depending on that entity, the structure might be a little different, but a lot of the big pieces are going to be the same. And now that I've kind of covered those three stages, just as I said, once myself and part of my team are going through some of the direct items on the application itself, keeping in mind the framing of what's going to be needed when, so that we can get early starts on it. But for purposes of this last part of this discussion, I've just opted to click on the screen on the pre-development loans. I'm only really going to sit here for a second before we start going into the application, because I want everybody to know, and I think I've had this conversation with a few of you before, but just as a reminder, at least we're starting to revisit a few of these items here, but where it stands right now, I want to make sure people are aware of some of the categories here that I'll say out loud for those of you who might not be able to see it on the screen. But our maximum loan amount right now is at $750,000 to any one particular borrower. There are opportunities to make exceptions for that, but it's going to be very much case by case basis. We're, as I said, in the process of kind of revisiting some of those methodologies, but for now, that's where we are. You don't necessarily have to have a project that big to come to us. We do a lot of loans that are less than that. It kind of depends on the project need, of course, but just high level requirements as you're thinking about, can I come to community investors for funding? And these are some of the criteria. Move to our loan term. Our maximum right now is 5 years. So if it's a longer term loan that you're looking for, then we might not be able to help. But we say 5 years. The reality is that most of our loans tend to involve projects that last around 2 or 3 years. It's kind of where it typically goes, but that's because we're looking to get this money back out into the community for positive projects. as often as we can. And so we don't like to tie up the funds for too many years because it inhibits the ability to go out and recycle that money for additional development. Some more of our criteria for all of these really are similar, but we do operate in low to moderate income census tracts. It's one of the way that we're ensuring that we're meeting our requirements as a community development financial institution, but also to make sure that we're adhering to our mission, which among other parts is really to invest in the disinvested. So these are the areas that we operate in. These are the community partners that we have. Now, as it stands currently, that's in Dallas and Collin County. In the near future, as we're going through recertification with the CDFI, that geographic area might expand beyond those county borders, but still have really the basis of low to moderate income census tracts. So lastly, I think we'll talk more about some of the guarantees that we're going to have just to serve as collateral on some of these loans. If you're representing a nonprofit entity, then generally that nonprofit group would be a sponsor, meaning they would be responsible for completion of the project as well as repayment of the loan. Whether you're nonprofit or for-profit, those guarantees are going to be the same. It's just a matter of the kind of where the buck stops. So a for-profit entity would rather probably have a personal guarantee on that front. But most of our borrowers tend to have specific legal entities set up for this project, which sort of protects against, whether or not there's any liability coming from any other issues. It kind of separates out the legal responsibilities. So that's what we typically see. We will talk more about that in detail later, but that's generally what we're going to expect for project completion. And also from a security standpoint on the loan, we would have to have collateral for it. That's going to be based on the site where the project is typically, but we have some flexibility in the case of pre-development loans, for example, where we can use a different property as collateral for the loan, simply because it's so early in the process that we just want to make sure that you have something kind of set up with a commitment and time to use the funds. So we have flexibility with all of those things. It's just a matter of having that conversation and understanding what your specific needs are. But that's all part of understanding the backdrop of how the loan's going to be repaid. And of course, the best option is to finish the project and either have some form of refinance if this is a type of investment that you're intending to keep for your organization. Or separately, if it's sort of for sale development, then that may be the method of which repayment would come. So as I said, these are just important high level ideas to have in the back of your head. I'm sure many of you already understand where you're coming from in your business strategy. We just need to understand that part too. So as we're talking more about the types of documents, we'll be more inclined to discuss the specific timing needs of different items, but I just think it's helpful to lead with that. And so I'm happy to transition now as we're going to talk more about the application itself. One, I'm saying, whenever you're ready, as long as it's.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
I was just trying to pass it along to you.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Give me 1 second. All right. So if any of you have reached out to us in need of funding for your real estate projects, you have seen this application, but we just wanted to go through it quickly and kind of highlight things that we need as soon as you submit your application versus things that we can kind of require and provide as you are submitting your entire package. So when you reach out to TREC CI for a real estate loan, we are going to send you this application. And what we really need to know a lot of is about the project, the title, the location. We want to know how much the total project is going to cost and how much you are requesting. As Clint said, we have a cap of 750, but depending on what your project is, depends on kind of how flexible we could be with the real estate deal. We want to know more about the description. So the real estate property involved, the square footage, condition, is it a vacant land? Is it a building? Your project start date and also your project manager information. So are you the developer or is someone else a developer? We really want to know who's a part of your team. And then as far as the organization, we need to know if it's a nonprofit or a for-profit, tax ID number, mission statement, website. If you have all of those things confirmed, we would like to know the information just for the purposes of us educating ourselves about your organization. And then on the second page, we kind of move along to the actual loan request. So collateral, Clint talked about the collateral. We need to know the address of the collateral so that we can do our due diligence and research on that piece of land or that property. We need to know the appraised value. If you have an appraised value, if you don't have an appraised value, you can of course leave this section blank. We want to know your loan term. So what you desire as your loan terms. So we can go out to 5 years, but as Clint said, typically it's about 2 to 3 years. So whatever your desired loan terms are, we would like to know those up front. And then also your desired repayment terms. We have some flexibility here, but we would like to know if you prefer to repay monthly, quarterly, or annually, and also what the source of those repayment terms or those repayments are. And then we move into the detailed project narrative. So tell us about your project. Like you're trying to sell your project, you're trying to get funding for your project. Please let us know as much information as possible about your project because you are pitching to investors who are trying to invest in this real estate project. And then for the next page, these are just all the documents that we require. So we will send you a link to a drive where you can kind of drop everything into, organize it how you want to organize it, and then we will export it into our files. So we ask for the sources and uses of funds. So how are you going to pay for this project? What are your needs? What are your needs from TREC CI? Pre-development time and assumptions. You need to know the budget. As far as the organizational history, the narrative, tell us about your organization. How long has your organization been around? Is it a new organization? Who's on your team? Who's on your board? Make sure you have those authority documents, those bylaws, any registrations that you have with the state of Texas. We will need all the information to pass on to our attorneys for them to review. And if you require evidence of appropriate insurance, we would need to have that and it needs to be up to date. And then also just the project description. So what is it about this project? How many square feet are you trying to build? What are the number of units? What are the plans that you have? Do you have any architectural plans? Are you not there yet? And if you're not there yet, it's okay not to check this box off. But if you have any plans that are solidified for the project, we would need to just have all of that documentation kind of in hand in our files. If you have a marketing study, that would be great, or a marketing plan, but it's not necessarily required, but we will need to know how you plan to market your project. And if it's, of course, housing, how you plan to sell or rent those properties out. We definitely need to know about zoning. No matter what, we would need to know about zoning. So sorry, this box has to be checked off. So make sure that you have your zoning in place. And if you need to change your zoning and you're in the process of doing that, we will need to know that also. As far as the project managers, so we need to know who's on your team. I know it's not just you building this project and executing your plans. We want to know who's the developer, who's the contractor, who's helping you raise money. We want to know about your entire team so that we can get to know you all as a whole. And because we will be working with each one of you, and each one of you brings something very special to the project. So we would like to know who's on your team and who you're working with. And then as far as who's taking out the loan, we will need to know background and resume of the organization, but also the person. If there's an investor ownership structure, we would need to understand how that is structured. Any other projects that you've worked on in the past, we would like to know what those projects are. Are they complete? Are they still under construction? How well did they do? What challenges you had? Feel free to please share your challenges so that we can kind of avoid and work with you if there are challenges in your new project. We will need financial statements for the last 3 years and tax returns or audited financial statements. And the financials that we ask for include the income statement, the balance sheet, and the cash flow statements, and also the last 3 months of the bank statement for the organization that is applying for the loan, and then your borrower debt schedule. So if you have any other debt under that organization, we would need to understand how much debt, who do you owe, and when those loans or that debt is looking to be paid off. And then in addition to that, if it's applicable for your project, we would need the last 3 years of a personal tax returns, last 3 months of personal checking and saving bank account statements. And then we have a personal financial statement document that we will send you if we need you to fill that out for Clint to review during his underwriting process. And then in addition to that, we can require an appraisal. We will have to get our own appraisal no matter what. So you can provide an appraisal if you have an appraisal that we review, but the further along we go into the process, we will have to get our own appraisal because we can't rely on another kind of third-party appraisal that wasn't ordered by us. And then if you had any environmental studies done on your project or on your property, we would like to see those, and also any title insurance that you may have on the property for the project. Did I miss anything, Clint? Feel free.
I think that really hits a lot of the points there, and thank you, Kiwanis, for going through it. I was going to talk to about, certainly on this topic, the timing that we're going to be looking at for some of these. And I know I was talking about it more high level earlier before we dove into the application, but I think really one of the main points I want to mention is just that we're not going to need every single piece of the puzzle at the beginning. I think want to make sure to communicate that this is a comprehensive list of what we would need to close on funding, and most of it is needed for us before we get to our approval process. And that's because essentially I'll be making the pitch for this loan to our investment committee, our loan committee here at TREC that will make those decisions. So we're really acting as a team to kind of build that package together and to make sure that we're understanding it so that the people who are making decisions on approval have all the information they need to make sure that we can move forward and start to get towards the closing process. So of the items that Kiwanis had mentioned just a little bit earlier, the three that I think I want to highlight in particular are ones where we've got outside parties involved. So I think the first one that pops in my head really is, I would say, a lot of the title insurance process. A lot of that's going to be determined based on kind of getting towards closing. So a lot of that process, I would say, might be initiated after we have approval, might not necessarily be part of the initial underwriting, unless you already own the policy from when you purchased the property. So what I mean is, if there's something that you have on hand after purchase for an existing title policy, I would expect that to be the case. But if it's early enough in the stage that you haven't actually purchased the property yet, then really we can work with whatever's existing for our review purposes, and we can deal with getting a lender's policy once we start to get towards closing. So that's one of the three I want to mention that could impact timing, because we just want to make sure we're not kicking off that process until we need to, and that we're focusing our time on where we need to be in steps. So the other, I'll just piggyback a little bit. I know Kiwanis already mentioned, but we would order an appraisal. Part of collecting all of the other documents on this list is going to be to supplement that appraisal. And of course, the reason that's there is just to make sure that we've got a third party, a different set of eyes, independent, that's looking at it and coming up with a as completed valuation or an as is valuation, such that we can substantiate the amount of loan that we're putting up. And so that would generally come directly from us, ordered on your behalf, and there'd be a level of coordination just to get site access, and that they can have some of the other planning documents, for example, or whatever you have, so that they have an idea of what's going to be accomplished here. And that appraisal process, it kind of depends on the type of project. Some of the smaller ones, maybe they can get something completed within a couple of weeks. And I'm sure those of you who may have actually done personal mortgages, purchasing a home before, that's kind of a typical timeline for turning around something like that. Of course, larger projects may need a little bit more time, or those may end up costing a little bit more money, but it's still got to be part of the process too. But as much heads up as we can do, as much time as can be allotted to get the appraiser documents that they need, that provides us with the pathway to get to these approvals. So the third one I'll mention too is another third-party report related to just environmental studies. Now, depending on the size of the project and the budget, we may be able to waive this for smaller single-family home build-outs. But anything larger than that, we're going to have a phase one environmental assessment done. And that typically costs a few $1,000s. And it is something that may have a longer lead time than even the appraisal. So that's one of the reasons I'm bringing it up now. So we want to make sure to engage. I would recommend engaging that if you haven't already purchased the property in question during the own due diligence process that you might go through. But at any rate, we would need that. I typically see them able to complete those within about 3 weeks. They will have to do a pretty extensive level of research on their own just for historical uses, but would need to coordinate probably a site visit on there too. And so that's part of the puzzle, but that one kind of has one of the longer lead times, and we just need to make sure that they're able to come out and say, hey, there's no historical issues on this site. There's nothing currently going on this site. But they're signing off on it. And there are reasons for that, just mainly to cover everybody involved in the process to understand that there's nothing on site since we've owned it that really has caused any environmental concern. So just looking for substantiation of that. As I mentioned, a lot of these other pieces can come in when you have them. The more that you have, the earlier, the better for us. But it's also just part of the discussion, and keep in mind that you would be educating us on where you are and what stage you're in and where you're in process. As long as we're understanding that, we can coordinate. As I said, just work together as a team to get this package together. As I'll kind of getting into the next topic here on our presentation here, just to make sure that I'm communicating about our own internal approval processes. We are a nonprofit, 501c3, so we also have a board and bylaws that kind of govern a lot of these rules and a lot of our loan policies that we're adhering to. But thankfully, we do have the flexibility as a CDFI to work in ways that maybe are a bit more broad and a bit more applicable than traditional lenders can. But we still have our own internal processes for approval that we have to move through. So the investment package, as we'll call it, loan package, that will include all of the information that's been submitted, all the third-party reports. I'll be compiling that just to get on our loan committee schedule, which is ad hoc. Our loan committee is made up of members of the Real Estate Council, which is our affiliate organization. And so they're coming from many different backgrounds in the real estate industry here locally. A lot of our committee, I would say all of the committee currently has day jobs as either, for example, attorneys, or some of them are bankers, some of them are also real estate developers, but they're volunteering their time in that role. So we'll get something on the schedule once we have a collection, and in a few weeks be able to get final approvals and in that presentation once we can get on their schedules. And from that point, really We try our best, and we've been successful in my entire time here to also get pro bono legal services provided from our real estate council member organizations. Also, a lot of different real estate attorneys are willing to prepare all of the loan documents on our behalf at no cost, which is important because that shaves off a significant expense from closing that you might, some of you who may have experienced that getting a loan and paying for their legal counsel can be rather expensive. But as long as we have willing members to provide that, then we're happy to remove that cost from the whole process too. At any rate, after approval by the committee, we should have legal representation to go ahead and get started on compiling documents. And at that point, if we need maybe to board another survey or whatever, that is one avenue where there might be some extra reporting to do from there. But really, what it should be at that point is simply going through the loan documents together, making sure we're having the same terms and ideas, if there need to be any adjustments to that, and separately working with the title insurance companies to make sure that we get a lender's policy set up to reflect that. So from there, we should be able to kind of get through that process. I would say 30 to 60 days is a good benchmark after approval. So as I said, the more of this package that we get early on, the earlier we can get to the approval stage and then start the closing together. So really, we need the last bits of the piece together to get in front of our committee. And sometimes that's where a lot of the lead up time is. So that's, I hope, a little bit more of a comprehensive view of our internal approval process, how quickly we can get to closing. And the rest of it is just a matter of getting due diligence kind of finalized as quickly as we can so we can get the money out. It's one of the reasons why we wanted to have this call is I'm hoping that some of you are getting some good information on, which pieces we need when, and I guess at the high level, when to kind of engage us in conversations about the capital structure of your project so that we can get a lot of these questions answered and third-party reports ordered so that we're able to move as quickly as we can to be as service to all of you. So is there anything that I may have left off, Dominique, Juanis, that you can think of?
There are a few questions. Thank you, Clint.
Oh,
Thank you,
certainly.
Kiwanis. Thank you,
Yeah.
everyone.
I
There
think
are a
we're
few
gonna-
questions in the,
Yeah,
in
we're
the
gonna
chat.
we're gonna ask Alondra to kind of read out those questions and monitor
Yeah.
those.
Sure. Seeing we've got some in the chat now.
Yes.
So the first question was, why do you need personal statements if we have corp or nonprofit? And it comes from Philip Johnson.
Sure, and Philip, we're not going to need personal statements if it's a nonprofit. We don't require that, so I may have misspoke earlier. But if this is a nonprofit organization, then we would expect the nonprofit to provide financial information and also for that nonprofit to assume the completion guarantees of the project itself. So that is the backdrop. That nonprofit would be the sponsor. And so alternatively, if there's a corporation that is also involved, this is a for-profit corporation, if I'm understanding your question correctly, we'll need to understand the ownership structure of that corporation, meaning who's involved with it, because ultimately the people who own that corporation are going to be in charge of repayment of the loan, but also in completion of the real estate project itself. So in order to understand the capacity to make those things happen, we would have to review the personal financials of the owners of that entity. So that's just the way that we're going to have to look at it from an ownership perspective. And that's why there's the distinction of not needing any personal financial information from a nonprofit versus the for-profit. So I hope that kind of answers that question. Juan, is there anything?
The next question, it comes from Stephanie Champion, and she asked, What do you recommend for a brand new organization that does not have 3 years of financial statements?
Thank you, Stephanie, and it's good to see your name here. I am thinking that my recommendation would be that we simply get as much as we can. If it's a new organization, I guess I should back up and say that I would expect the borrowing entity to probably be a new organization. So I just want to make that distinction. That there's a sponsor entity that's either a nonprofit or for-profit. That sponsor is maybe where we're going to want to see as much as we can. If this is a new entity, if you have less than a few years of information, maybe you're such a small organization that you aren't required to have an audit yet, for example. But whatever you have available is where we'll start from. Our general expectation is that for an established entity, we would have at least 3 years that we can review just to see trends over time. But if we don't have that, then we'll work with what we have. I would advise, at least in those instances, that the personal financials would become more important in the case of a for-profit entity and sort of just establishing the history and capabilities of the borrower. So even if it's a new ownership entity, as long as we're understanding the ownership structure and the capital structure within those entities and kind of charting out where the different groups are and the hierarchy of it, and then we're going to be in good shape to answer a lot of our questions about how to structure the loan documents themselves. So from a credit perspective, getting those statements is one thing, but I would say is equally important it is to understand the corporate structure and how those different bodies relate to each other. So all of that will just impact the loan documents themselves.
For the next question, and this comes from Heijin Wu. For the property info, if it's a new build on vacant land, is it going to be for the vacant land, for title insurance and appraisals?
I know, kind of talking this, if we're expecting new build on a vacant land, then the appraisal is going to look at two things. It's going to look at an as-is valuation, meaning what is it right now today, versus an as-complete valuation, meaning what does it look like at the end of this project? What is the expectation of what that future valuation will be based on the plans that are submitted? So in many ways, I would say that appraisal is really, looking at both of those stages and understanding how that's going to be impacted over time. We're also looking at that as a lending organization for the same reasons, but they're, as a third party, going to have more of an objective look at it outside of either group. And when it comes to the title insurance, and they're going to insure the land existing as it is. And they are similarly going to understand how they're anticipating the lender's policy to change over time. And the way that that happens is through disbursements of the loan. So it's actually not so different now that I'm really thinking about it this way, but the title insurance company is going to look at how their policy needs to change based on the amount of money that's put into the project. And at the end of that lender's policy, that is to say, once all the loan funds have been dispersed and it gets to where the project is complete, they're going to have an idea of what that policy amount should be then too. So everybody's pretty cognizant of, based on the information we provide, how much time is going to take and how much is expected to be spent and for what. And they're all making those adjustments just as we are, just as the borrower. So I hope that's helpful. Let me know if that's answering the question.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you, Clinton.
Sure.
The next question comes from Dr. Allen. Hello, will we cover construction loans as well? Is there a max on construction loans? If so, what is it?
So did cover at least a little bit on the distinctions that we have between construction projects versus an acquisition loan, pre-development. And really, it's just a matter of being a little bit more intensive on just the due diligence side of the project plans itself. And have kind of talked through how we work with other groups to coordinate that effort. Our maximum for a construction loan right now is the same maximum that we would have for any other of our type of loans. As I said, we have the $750,000 limit right now to any one particular borrower. So that's going to be the ceiling unless there's some type of exception that we can make. But generally speaking, that's going to be the limit that we have for any of these types of loans. It's just a matter of staying kind of below that threshold for now. We can, of course, partner with other organizations, other lenders. We're flexible enough that we can subordinate another group's loan. If the project's a little bit bigger, you need more loan financing, then we're happy to play with others with that, make sure that there's enough money to make sure that the project is successfully completed and then the community gets the benefit from it. So really just to kind of harp on that, we do have that maximum in place. We are still looking at that, potentially raising that in the near future. But we're kind of milling that over internally. So we'll see how that evolves.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, and I believe this is the last question from Etho Pugh. For nonprofits, what years do you need financial audits for?
There are instances where your nonprofit is a certain size where it's not absolutely required to have audited financial statements. So there's potential that really we're going to look at reviewed statements. You see this early on in stages as they're new and these organizations are kind of getting off the ground. So just to make the difference point there about if they're audited or not, it just kind of depends on where the organization is and their own kind of growth and development journey. But what we'd really like to see is the last 3 years of financial statements. We would prefer that they're audited, certainly, just because that takes a lot of the legwork off of the review. Understanding that there's a stamp of approval from an independent auditor is a boon, a benefit too. But even if those statements are prepared, then the best quality that you have is what we'd like to see. Like I said, ideally about 3 years of the recent past, and then whatever interim year to date, just because that helps us kind of track change over time, see how the organization is growing, and to get to be a part of that growth too. As I think Stephanie had asked earlier, if there's a situation where it's a relatively new entity and you're truly getting off the ground, then we're going to work with what we have available, and I'm going to work as a partner to present that information both accurately, but also in the best light. So we're going to deal with what we have, and we're going to make the best of it at the end of the day. But we're hoping that you'll at least have a few years there on hand just to provide to us.
Awesome.
That
I
was
think we
great.
get them
Thank you,
all.
Clint. Yeah, thank you, Clint. That was great. Great. Sorry, Dominique. I just wanted to tell Clint, thank you.
You're fine. We were doing the same thing, no problem. So with that, I really feel like Kiwanis, if you didn't have anything else, or Clint, I think that we have I hope that we've given you all insight on how to move a little bit differently inside the website and how to fill out the application. Please know that when you reach out, we also have the explainer document. I think we covered that, but the explainer document that goes with the application that breaks down each piece, just like we did today. And of course, questions or thoughts, reach out. We're available. And with that, we appreciate you and send us any questions or comments that you may have. We will give you, a whole 15 minutes back in your lunch hour. So go enjoy something great. And with that, thank you so much and have an amazing day.